Hello and welcome to session 12 of Talking Aspergers and More with Andrew. I'd like to welcome you all here today, this afternoon. We have a new one with us today. So Lauren, hello, welcome, and thanks for
Hi.
coming along. What I usually do is just give a little mention that I am recording this because I like to put this on my YouTube channel and make it public for people to come and see and look and replay back if they want to. So I hope everyone's okay with me being able to do that. And today I'm actually really quite excited about today's talk because it's going to be about people throughout history who have been a significant or made significant contributions to the world we see ourselves in. When you look at people like Einstein and Newton, Tesla, Leonardo da Vinci, Elon Musk has recently announced that he was diagnosed with Asperger's some time ago. But when we look at those sorts of people, Alan Turing as well, they all had something in common, and it's widely believed that they all had Asperger's syndrome. And I think one of the reasons why they were so good at what they did was because they didn't constrain themselves to the narrow field of, and I hate using the phrase the box and boxes, because they thought, what if we do this? And what if we think about doing something in a different way? And they allowed themselves to free think about a problem that they had. Let's take Alan Turing, for example, who cracked the German Enigma code machines in World War II. He devised a way of cracking those things which were believed to be unbreakable codes. And he did it because he thought out of the box. He thought numerically, he thought visually, and he was able to come up with a series of machines that could crack the code. And the very interesting part is the machines that he set up weren't actually designed to crack the code. And I've just contradicted myself there. But what he was actually doing was trying to find out what code it wasn't. So he would set multiple numbers of these machines up, let them run, and when he came out with the results at the end, he knew which ones the code wasn't, which meant he had a smaller number of potential codes that he could set the women who worked at Bletchley Park on to try and crack. And so they had a much smaller data set to try and crack, rather than trying to crack a massive great number of possibilities. He got rid of all the ones that it wasn't, and then thought about how to crack the ones that it was. And I think that's such an amazing approach to think of, just what if I ruled out the things that I can rule out and then concentrated on what's left. And that ability that he had was an amazing thing. And as I say, he was able to crack the codes, which made a huge difference to the convoys in the North Atlantic in World War II getting supplies to Britain from America and Canada. And it made a vast difference to our potential future. And if we look at someone else like Leonardo da Vinci, most people know Leonardo da Vinci as rather a good painter. I mean, he's one of the greatest painters that's ever lived, but he was so much more than that. When you look at his notebooks and his codex, it's full of engineering, science, anatomy, paleontology, geology, philosophy, because he just thought about things in a different way. Why don't I look at that particular aspect in a different way? And he allowed himself to do that and think. And when you look at some of his inventions in his notebooks, he invented flying machines and the precursor to the helicopter in the early 16th century, which is quite phenomenal. It was like 300-400 years ahead of his time. And he did that because he wasn't constrained by other people's thinking, what he should or shouldn't do. He thought, what if we did this? What if I looked at it in this way? And that is the sort of thing that we should be looking for with talented employees in business. Doesn't matter what your business is. Most forms of business need some kind of talented pool of people to come up with new ideas, new products, new ways of doing something, and be innovative. And that's exactly what people like Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, another one, who his dream was to give free electricity to the world. But unfortunately, someone came along called Edison and decided no, I can make money out of that. And he had an awful long battles with Edison about his patents and his engineering designs. But he thought about how to do something different that hadn't been done before, and it was quite fascinating. And I'm just going to throw this open to the floor to say, some of you on the calls I know have Asperger's or are believed to have Asperger's. Some may be on the call for the first time wondering what it is we do here. Well, we're trying to identify our strengths, try to help other people understand that yes, we might have some challenges socially. There's no hiding away from that. But the benefits of employing people who have Asperger's syndrome or engaging people, just as Damien was saying before we came on the record there, he's found something new because he was looking for something new. And he's developed that, and he's got other people involved in it. And that's a class of wonderful example of someone looking at what we know and looking at a particular plant and seeing something different on it and thinking, I wonder what that is. Damien can describe this far better than I can, but the point I'm getting across is that he thought about what he saw and what he observed, and he then investigated it and put his mind to it. And I was just wondering if anyone on the call wanted to just comment on that. Lauren, is that something you might have some experience of?
It's not. I have to freely admit that I don't know a lot about Asperger's, but I work in HR consultancy, and over the last couple of years, especially, the topic of neurodiversity has come up more and more. And when we're helping our clients with that and trying to look at opportunities rather than just challenges in relation to any neurodiverse situation, the more that we know, we're never going to be experts, but the more we know, the more we understand, the better that we can help people to think differently about these things. So that's why I've logged on today.
That's really great. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to do here, is to help people who are on the spectrum, and help people like yourself who work with employers like I do myself, to say, there's a group of people out there who have Asperger's, or they're diverse in other areas, and they can be beneficial to your business. And one of the phrases I use is, if you always employ the same type of person doing the same type of thing, guess what? You're going to get the same type of result. If you want to have something that's innovative and new, and a new way of doing something, a new product, new process, just like Steve Jobs did with the iPhone, you've got to have people who think differently. And because by having people from all sorts of ethnicities and backgrounds and a whole range of diverse issues, you're going to have a greater pool of knowledge and ability from which you can then move your business forward. And that's very much the aim of this group, is to help others identify and understand that we're all here together. We're all in this boat together. And wouldn't it be great if we all were given the opportunity to contribute in our own way, with our own thinking, and move things forward in a more harmonious way, so that everyone can benefit from that, not just a smaller group of individuals. Laura, is there something you might want to add to that? You're still on mute. There we go.
Yeah, I was still muted. Okay, so can you just ask me a direct question? Can you tell me what exactly you want to know?
Okay. How have you, when you're working, have you gone about doing something in a different way to others that has been a benefit to your teaching that you have with your students? Have you thought, actually, they want me to do it this way, but I think if I did it this way, that might be better for my students?
Okay, luckily enough, I was never taught how to do it, how to teach my students. So it came to me natural to use certain methods instead of others. For example, using my body language, or using pictures to show my students objects, or yeah, because I was teaching kids mostly at the very beginning. So I was, playing with them, showing them pictures, pointing to the image, pointing to the picture, telling them the word, or use rhythm a lot, or repeating the same words many times by keeping a certain pace. That helps a lot to memorize. Or using different colors, especially with primary school students. If I show them with different colors, different elements in the sentence, they understand better the function of those elements. So, but this all comes to me very natural. I never actually learned how to do it. I never took a book and read how to do this. And I could just see that it was working. So I was keeping using the same method.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because one of the things that I've realized when the more I look into it and when I talk to people is the use of color and the use of pictures and the use of repetitive language and patterns is exactly the sort of thing that works for my head. It works for my brain to understand what's going on. And one of the ideas that I've put across to other people is, when you're briefing someone about a new piece of work that they're doing, have a checklist and go through that, but use aids to assist that. Just like you've said, with a visual picture of something or color, have them color coded so that there might be 4 or 5 different elements to the task. So element 1, you might have a blue color. Element 2, you might have a yellow color. Element 3, you might have a green or a red color. And that helps the person on the spectrum, and anyone else for that matter, understand that there's groupings and there's different types of aspects to the job, and there's different steps and stages that they go through. So I love the way you've described that, because that's how it works for me to be able to see and to understand. I'm very much a show me how it works. When we first started using computers, I would much rather prefer sitting down next to someone who knew more than I did and said, okay, show me how this works. How do I open a Word document? How do I then start typing on it? How do I save? And how do I copy and paste? And having someone next to me show me how to do it is the best way that I learned. And that I find that quite fascinating, that we all learn in different ways. But the 3 or 4 things that you just said there, Laura, different color, tonality, body language, repetition are all things that work in different ways for different people. So by doing that, you're catching as many people as you can, rather than just using one technique that might be visual. For those who are more auditory learners, won't necessarily pick that up, but you've caught the auditory learners, because you do repetition and you use your voice in that way. So that I think that's fascinating, how you do that and how that works for you.
One thing is, okay, because we may not be able to understand body language at all times, but I also like using body language a lot, and I try to use it as much as possible. And that helps a lot. That helps a lot. And it is fun. It's fun to use it.
Yeah. I think back to, I don't know if any of you know Lee Evans, the comedian. He's a very visual, very slapsticky type comedian. And I find his stuff far more funny than someone like Jack D, who's very deadpan and very, very straight. He stands there in his suit and he's got the microphone, and that's it. He doesn't move about the stage, and he doesn't use his arms and his visuals and tone of voice and strange images and strange faces that Lee Evans does. And because I can relate to that, the way that Lee Evans puts it across, I find it much funnier, because it's hitting more of my senses than just someone standing with a microphone and telling jokes that might be funny. I mean, Jack D's stuff can be very dry and very droll, but very funny. But I understand more the slapsticky nature of Lee Evans, and looking back at Laurel and Hardy films, their stuff is just classically comic, because they use all of their bodies and all of the tools, like a plank of wood and a glass bottle. They use all of those things to get across the humor. And I think that's fascinating. And those are the sorts of tricks and skills that we should be using to explain to different people who have different abilities and different understanding of things, so that they can relate to what you're asking them to do, what you're telling them. And I think that's fascinating. What you said there, Laura, was exactly how I would like to be taught as a child. And you would have me engaged. I would be sitting there at the front of my seat, because you're connecting with me. You've built the rapport with me, and so I would be listening, watching. What's she doing? What's going on? Fascinating to see that. And
we should try once, Andrew. We should try once. I can teach you Italian with that method. You know, we can try that once.
Interesting. David, do you want to tell us a bit more about your wonderful new your discovery? I'm fascinated by that. And how did you come by this discovery? You're still mute, Damien.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm quite good at spotting when things change on a plant, or when there's something slightly that's not what I would call normal on a plant. So I spotted these little dots on the leaf edge, and I was asking myself, well, firstly, what are these, and how are they formed? So I couldn't get beyond. I find that I have to understand everything before I can understand anything. If I don't see the full picture, I find that I'm confused and I don't understand anything. So I started with the structure of the leaf. I looked at the structure, and then realized, looking under the microscope, that there are special pores on the edge of the leaf. And so I was asking people, and first of all, no one seemed to know, and said, no, it must be just a group of cells. And eventually found that the leaf is similar to other particular plants that have a particular breathing pore on the leaf edge, called hydrothoids, where they exude moisture, excess moisture. Some plants you see with a little bit of moisture on the leaf edge, and a similar sort of thing to helps them to breathe. So I looked at those, and then looked at some scientific reports when people suggested that disease could enter that area, especially if these very humid conditions, these remain open when it's humid, because they're trying to get rid of moisture. So I then was thinking, okay, well, if there's a disease there, what is it? So I took these plants to a lab in Seville. There's a very pleasant lady there who didn't charge enough at all. And we started looking at these leaves under the microscope and spent a long time trying to isolate the bacteria. And then we found the DNA of the bacteria. And at the same time, I was in contact with a lady in University of Warwick in England, who now works for the UK government at FERA. And she'd been working on something similar in the past, and she thought she'd found a bacteria in Florida that's similar on the same plant. So I sent her some samples, and then I grew some plants myself. We isolated the bacteria in a lab in Seville, and then I injected the leaf with the bacteria to see whether, first of all, it was pathogenic, whether it could cause a disease, first of all, and then secondly, whether that bacteria is the same as the isolates that this lady at Warwick University had collected from Florida. And then after reviewing it, it seemed to be the same bacteria, and it hadn't been, there was no description of that in this big catalogues of bacteria. So it was called Xanthomonas. The name of the bacteria is Xanthomonas nasturtii, because it affects nasturtium plants. And then we started looking at different control methods. So I was growing plants on the window ledge of the office under sort of plastic containers, and injecting the bacteria, and then applying a certain product, like first a foliar feed made of copper, and having control plants, and seeing whether there's any difference, observing over the month. And she did the same things at the University of Warwick, although she had better facilities. and we seemed to come up with the same results. And she was very pleased that I was able to, with my Coca-Cola bottles upturned, come up with the same result to detect the bacteria and do it on a sort of home level.
But you've just demonstrated the scientific method, isn't it? That's the fascinating part of what you've done. Is you've looked at something, you saw something that you thought was different, and rather than just go, yeah, so what? You thought, oh, I want to get to find out about this, and the scientific curiosity that you had has led to a discovery, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I went to see someone first of all at Lancaster University, who I then ended up doing some work with, and for about a month I was talking to them, and that they thought that this person's a little bit crazy, and that there's nothing in this. There's nothing in this, and then eventually they suddenly switched and said, "Oh, I think there is something in that." So, but I just kept on. I do have the ability to keep on and on and on until I'm happy that I found the answer. Whether I'm right or wrong, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
so I knew there was something that needed to be resolved, and
I think that tenaciousness, that tenacity of identifying something and think, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and I'm going to investigate, and I'm going to ask the questions, and I'm going to find out. And you did your own little experiment of growing something in your own home. I think that's fascinating, and that sort of re-emphasizes what I was saying at the beginning, that people on the spectrum have this what if mentality, this asking the questions and exploring it and finding out. You might have done all of that and got nowhere. You might have identified something that was found out somewhere before, but that didn't deter you.
That wasn't the aim.
No.
I want to answer a question to myself, not for anyone else, but
yeah,
it's obviously very positive that, and now that the lady who's full-time, looking at this in work, has got a grant from the UK government for research developing understanding of this bacteria.
That's
so it's great, and it all seems to take off by itself.
I'm really pleased for it. That's fascinating. I love the fact that you just saw something on a leaf, and you went, I'm going to investigate that, and I'm not going to give up until I know what it is. And I think that's part of the the mentality, the openness that we have about looking for something new, finding out what is going on, and then really getting into it until you understand it. And it's that desire to understand what's going on that drove you to do that. And I think that's fascinating, that people on the spectrum have that tenacity, that resilience to find out and find out and understand it. And it's the ability to engage with that and enhance that's going to help us all out in the long run. I think it's fascinating that something as simple as an observation of something on a leaf has led you to a new discovery. And I all power to your elbow for that, Damien. Because what else might we not have discovered? I mean, penicillin is a great example. With the best will in the world, Alexander Fleming didn't know what he found that morning when he went back into his lab, and there was this growth on a petri dish in a pile of petri dishes on a sink. But rather than just wash the petri dish, he investigated it, and it was actually one of his colleagues who did more of the investigation of it, and then got the recognition much later in life. But penicillin, that turned out to be a major medical breakthrough in the treatment of, I don't know, is it diseases or viruses? I think it's more diseases rather than viruses, but I could be wrong. But they investigated, they saw something that was different, and they investigated it, and they didn't stop until they identified what it was, and then if it had any medical or any scientific use. And I think that's the joy of what people on the spectrum can bring, is that what if question, and what's happening there, and what can we do, and how can we investigate it, and how can we then bring other people in so that we can explain and develop our knowledge. And I think that's really exciting, how just a simple thing can lead to something more, because you're giving the opportunity to express themselves, and there's nothing better in a work environment when you're given the opportunity to do something that you want to do, and you can see it through to a conclusion, because that's going to make you want to get out of bed on those horrible, windy, wet, icy, snowy mornings in Scotland, where I live, and go to work, because you want to know more about it by the time you finish work that day than you did when you got up in the morning. And I think it's amazing what people on the spectrum can bring to employers. As Lauren said at the beginning, there is a growing awareness of what people from a whole variety of diverse backgrounds and abilities can bring to the workplace. And I think I saw it on LinkedIn, I think it was earlier this week or the back end of last week, that there's a DEI storm coming, and it's whether employers are going to be saying, yeah, we're ready for it, let's find out, let's understand it, let's investigate it, or whether they're going to be way at the back of the line wondering what's just happened. And it will only really come to their attention when they either have an issue with someone that they haven't necessarily treated correctly, because they've been investigating something and they shouldn't have been doing, or they've been trying to find out why something worked, or the lawyers get involved and suddenly there's an issue with how they've set up their whole business, and they're missing out on how they go about treating their employees, how they train their employees. And those are really important things. And I think the more we can have these discussions, the more people can understand what everyone can bring to the table, then we're going to have a more diverse, a more equitable, and a more inclusive workplace. And that would be just fantastic, I think. Lauren, what's your experience of how, where we sit on the DEI at the moment in your experience?
In general, how employers are doing?
Yeah.
I think there's in larger companies, it's definitely high up on the agenda in terms of they want to understand more about what they should be thinking about differently in relation to it. I think in smaller companies, it's not really up there yet.
Yeah.
And it needs to be. I think I believe that the pandemic and remote working has kind of thrown some of these issues far more into the spotlight. I mean, I'm thinking about what Laura said about body language and various other things, but this working in isolation that many people have had to do, and only having a small screen, I think that's been hugely difficult for lots of people, but particularly for people who have diverse abilities. And I think that has meant that this needs to climb up corporate agendas much faster. We're missing out otherwise. We are missing out, and we are also creating a larger mental health issue because of how people are made to feel if they're not treated properly.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think you're right. I think the big organizations, the big corporate businesses have realized it's not just like investors in people 30 years ago. It's not just something that they stick a plaque on the wall. They actually have to do something about it. And I think that realization is dawning on the bigger companies. And I think it's the ones lower down, the smaller companies, the medium-sized companies, who aren't quite sure what it means yet. And we just need to keep raising awareness, having the discussions, and offering advice on how we can help. And I think we'll get there. And I think you're right that the pandemic has actually raised an awful lot of issues around not just DEI, but around the workplace generally, because I think that there's going to be some people who might never go back to an office because they don't need to. I mean, when I worked as a geologist in the 90s, I could have taken my work home and worked at home for a week and then gone back into the office on Friday afternoon to report to my bosses. I wasn't allowed to, wasn't enabled to, but there was nothing about what I did meant I had to be in the office, visible, that I couldn't have done at home at my kitchen table or my dining room table, and had a mobile phone that I could have been contacted if need be. And I think there's going to be, I think a lot of big companies are going to realize that they don't need the big corporate business presence in the city centers, which are incredibly expensive. They're difficult to park in. The managers and the directors will be okay because they've got their private car park underneath, but the general employees find it a real struggle to find somewhere to park, and so the public transport that takes twice as long, and all of these little knock-on effects of working in a big city environment with a big office. They won't need that. They might need to have a satellite office in the city, a small office with some meeting rooms and places where people can come in and work for half a day or work for a day, and they can have their face-to-face meetings with their clients. But this concept of there's 1,000 people in our business, and let's have all 1,000 people sitting in one building in the middle of Glasgow or in the middle of Manchester or the middle of London, I think that's going to change. And I think the opportunities that brings for more efficient working, once we've seen the benefits that people have had from working at home with the pandemic, and how they've been able to get on with their work, and they're not as distracted because the chap sitting next to them isn't going to keep interrupting them and asking them what was happening on EastEnders last night, or the guy who regularly comes around at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with his cup of tea and distracts everyone while he's talking to you. Those things aren't going to happen. And once we've got into the situation where you have to trust people to do the work that you've given them to do, but they're doing it from home, there's ways of checking that. There's ways of having reports. There's a phone call conversation in the afternoon, or there's a daily progress sheet that you can prepare. Doesn't need to be long and complicated, but it just gives the managers the indication that this work is being done. There are ways to deal with how you can check that someone is doing the work that you've asked them to do without having to be in the place, the big office, to do that. And I think that's something that's going to change, and the realization of that is going to change. And I think for the better. Yeah, definitely. Well, can't believe we've nearly run out of time already, but I wanted to just mention that as if there's something that someone has been mentioned today, or in any other session that someone wants to talk to me about privately outside this forum, so that it's not recorded, I'm quite happy to do that, have a conversation with anyone about anything. If it develops into something more significant, then we'll talk about that on a commercial basis. But I'm more than happy to have conversations with anyone on any of the calls about something that's come up today. And being someone who works in the field of helping employers work with Asperger's syndrome, then I've got a series of products and facilities and services that I provide. So if anyone's interested in those, then please let me know. But yeah, the skills and abilities of people who have Asperger's syndrome they can be very large, very significant. And I think, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if every business had an Alan Turing or a Nikola Tesla or a Leonardo da Vinci, not only employed there, but fulfilled employment, so that they're not just being there to do a certain task, but they're allowed to use all of their abilities in the benefit of the business. I think how good that would be if we could have every business had people like Da Vinci, Alan Turing, Einstein, Newton, Elon Musk in your business, working for you productively, coming up with new ways of doing something. I think the possibilities even now in the third decade of the 21st century, the possibilities that that can bring to business are barely tapped. They're barely tapped. And I think if we can do more of that, then that would be fantastic for all of us. And it would make that person feel valued at work. And there is nothing more important than that for the person who's working, than to feel valued and appreciated in what they do. And I think if we can do more of that, then all the better, all the better. So unless anyone's got any last minute things they'd like to say or ask, I'll close down for the day, but look forward to seeing you all next week. I'll be posting my topic for next week on Friday on LinkedIn, as I normally do. So let's close the record.